the role of artists and culture is fundamental and so necessary, and we need so much more of it, and not only on the side. The role of arts and culture in societal and civilizational change right now needs to be much more integral into yes artworks and imagine and helping us to culturally co-produce how we live and work together into the future, and that means works, artworks, and it also means artist perspectives into much more mainstream institutions, ideas, thoughts about how change occurs.
There's a beautiful crow wishing us well. So another episode of the Conscient podcast. I'm with Jayne Engle on the path in Mont Royal in Montreal. And this might end up being a soundwalk, Jayne, because I always notice whatever the sounds are around me. But anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
So I'm just following you on the walk here.
Let's go here.
Okay. So I'm happy you just listened to the episode Reality, and you were telling me about it, and so I decided to turn the machine on and just capture this conversation. But maybe you can just start by telling us who you are.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's always a tricky question, isn't it?
How do you identify yourself? Who are you not?
Right, okay. So Jayne Engle is my name, and I'm here in Montreal, where I have lived for 17 or 18 years on what is also known as Jojage. So I identify strongly with that and with the Indigenous history of this place. Not myself Indigenous, however, I would just say that one of the most important journeys of my life right now has been learning more about Indigenous ways and reconciliation. So that's maybe a first thing, because it's a journey that is sacred to me and informs so much of what I'm thinking and doing right now. And it's very much a deep learning journey. So I'm originally from the U.S. I grew up on what is Susquehannock territory, but I've traveled and lived in many places. And one of the things that affects a lot how I see the world is that I've lived and worked in places that were experiencing deep societal transition. Uh-huh. So that was after the fall of the Berlin Wall and communism. I lived in Eastern Europe for a while, so saw how society was changing there. And I spent a lot of time in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, doing deep work with communities there. So that was deep societal transition as well. So having those kinds of experiences, as well as working in cities in different parts of the world, sometimes working with the most marginalized populations, really affects how I see the world.
And we'll get some of your thoughts about cities a bit later, because I know it's one of your areas of interest. But I just want to comment on the soundscape here, because people are walking with these sticks that create a beautiful high-pitched. They're coming our way here. We're going to experience this. This is a beautiful sound.
It is.
Just let them pass here. It's lovely. This might end up becoming a sound walking show. Because when I was in Vancouver with Anjali Appadurai, episode I think 23, we did a sound walk, and it was their first time sort of doing that kind of it's a type of meditation in the sense that you're paying attention to the sounds around you. Anyway, reality. So you listened to it. What kind of response did you have to the episode? There are so many things to pick up on. One, just an overall
thought of how it struck me is I so deeply appreciated the soundscape as well as the pace.
Uh-huh.
And very often there can be a temptation these days when we listen either to podcasts or audiobooks. Sometimes there's a temptation to speed up even. So whatever is the usual pace, sometimes to listen to a book faster at 1.5 or 2 times. And this was certainly not that. This was actually slowed down in a way that enabled space for contemplation, reflection within the span of the podcast, which I really appreciated. And I think it's an important time for contemplation, that's for sure. So that's kind of an overall.
And what about the idea of reality? And one of the reasons I'm exploring it in this season is because of the tendency we have to deny certain realities. And being a Zen practitioner, we're encouraged to experience reality. But it's an interesting topic, right? Because philosophically, it's an endlessly fascinating thing to talk about. But what is your reading of reality, especially in relation to the climate emergency?
Yeah, I think that people, of course, have very different ways of experiencing reality themselves, and it's important to say that each of our own realities is multiple. So we each have certain lenses through which we see the world, and so of course there isn't one reality, and so understandings of reality are actually core to how I think. And then another aspect of that I've noticed recently is that for some people there's great comfort in seeing reality in quotes, seeing reality as clearly as possible. So recognizing what exists and that actually helps them to make sense and navigate in the world. And for others, even for their mental or psychological or spiritual health, they almost purposefully limit their exposure to what reality is because it can be too jarring and unhealthy for them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I tend to be more someone who wants to see as clearly as possible what my own capability for seeing reality in order to then navigate, make sense, and decide how to deal with things. So in particular, there was something that you pointed to. I think it was in a quote of Yuval Harari about biological reality.
Historian Yuval Harari. If you think about any religion, any economic system, any political system, at the basis you will find some fictional story about God, about money, about human rights, about a nation. All of these things are fictional stories. They are not a biological reality. But it's a very powerful and convincing and benign fiction that helps us organize our political and legal systems in the modern world.
I thought about that a little bit because I understand where that was coming from, and at the same time I thought, okay, well, do we start to separate biological reality from other kinds of realities? And then that got me on a thought path, which was also in your discussion around realities, which I'm not sure how much you use the word spirituality. I might use the word spirituality, where sometimes when you talked about culture, I might also think about culture as spirituality. And recognizing that there is so much which is not seen or perceived.
Writer Sherry Mitchell. We must tune in to our ability to see beyond the physical reality that surrounds us and awaken to the vast, unseen world that exists.
the importance of a recognition that our perceptions are limited, right? And our perceptions of biological reality are limited.
Yeah.
So, and then we have more varying degrees probably of perception about what are other forms of spiritual or cultural realities.
Yeah. Or fictions.
Yes.
Because, I put the Harari quote in part because it provoked me to think about institutions like money and, even capitalism. It's not an institution, but it's a system. And how we buy into them, we believe in them, and it's fine. It's how we operate. We have to believe in something. But if you actually step back and don't believe them so much, then the world opens up a bit more, and you're not so much in a system, but you're more free to acknowledge what they are, for better or for worse, and to kind of create your own reality piece by piece of what you think is true. And you're right that there are these different lenses. And because I'm an artist, I deal with fantasy and fiction all the time, right? Because it's a lot what artists explore. But just yesterday I was talking to somebody who's saying, well, artists are truth tellers. I said, okay, is that true? It doesn't matter, because artists are going to do their work anyway. But I might think it's true that in the sense that they're trying to bring me an experience of life that they feel needs to be transmitted. So anyway, and so it goes around like this. Almost every day now I do interviews with different people, and every step. Now we're stepping slowly here on a walk up a mountain, but every step of learning opens another door, and very few doors are closed. So it can be a bit confusing, because after a while you say, well, have I got it now? Have I got it? And you're never going to get it,
right?
But you do advance.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe just one other thought that's kind of conceptual before getting more specific, with the idea of the nature of reality and questioning it. I heard something recently about equating, so truly perceiving is imagination. And it got me thinking about imagination and wonder in relation to perception.
Okay.
And these are fundamentally important notions for how we see reality, because I think we also can't really see reality unless we actually have imagination capability.
Yeah.
But people often see those as separate, and I actually think that they're integral.
Right. That's a very good point.
And maybe even an example of that to get into a specific that your podcast evoked in me was a memory of an experience I had working in Haiti, and it was after the earthquake in 2010. I then went over the period of a few years. Spent a few months working deeply, doing participatory community development work. So, and it was part of my PhD research. But in that kind of work, it is also, the community participants are also co-researchers, right? Because you're learning together and then adapting research methods as you go based on what you learn. And one of the things I was trying to learn was of what stories people felt themselves a part, where they felt they were going as a community, whether it was desirable, what were the relationships of power, the power dynamics, and who won and who lost as a result of those, and what would they like to do about it. And one of the things we came across through various participatory exercises is we worked on a timeline, and a timeline of kind of a collective community timeline, looking at past, looking at present, and looking at future. And something that surprised me deeply was how incredibly contested both the past and the present were. So people had very different understandings even of the experience of what we consider to be and what by many forms of evidence is an incredibly brutal dictatorship under the Duvalier dictators. And there was a highly contested remembrance about that. And there was nostalgia, quite positive nostalgia among many people for various reasons. And so it raised all sorts of raised all sorts of debates, and I was surprised at how contested the past was. And then even in the present, what came up that was so contested were notions of culture and spirituality, which I would say somewhat in relation to Vodou culture and its relationship with other forms of formalized religion there, such as Christianity, and how those interact or don't, and how incredibly contested that is, even within society. And of course, my position as an outsider in the society also affected how we discussed it. But my point is that perceptions of reality, of past and present, are and can be incredibly contested, and it's so important to recognize that in the broader context when we think now about reconciliation, about ideas of reparation, about all of these kinds of things. There are so many realities. And with respect to the future, what was very interesting in this Haiti experience was that was far less contested. So how people felt about the kind of future that they wanted to see and the kind of future that was desirable, where their children had access, to learn to read and write and explore and love and create in a safe society, in a safe, nurturing society with human rights and all of these kinds of things was much more agreed upon. And so that perception of a future reality was very much grounding for people. And so I think one of the things that it also made me realize that one of the things I don't think we do nearly enough, and where arts and culture can play an incredible role, is about this notion of futures and how we see futures. And even though we talk about this a lot, I feel like we don't really do it nearly as much as we should.
Well, if we can't agree on the past, but we're interested in the future, that's maybe okay. Artists sometimes are interested in interpreting the past, but many are, like speculative fiction, and what I'm learning about speculative fiction is that there are many, many different genres and many different points of view, especially in more non-Western traditions. The view of the world is really quite different of what the world could and should be. And I think that's a big role for filmmakers and writers and all kinds of creative people. And I don't draw the line at creative with artists, right? Because we're all creative naturally, and but just artists are better at it or good at it because they spend more time and they have talents. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Jayne, Engle, it's fun to do this walk because now we're about halfway up the mountain looking up across the city, and the soundscape is changing, right? Because the traffic is actually diminishing as we get higher and further away, but other sounds are coming, like there's a rumble, kind of a sweet rumble coming as we ascend the Mont Royal, so it's quite fun. Mm-hmm. So we're... I know that your day job is with McConnell Foundation, but you're also working on books. And is there anything you'd like to tell us about the kinds of work you're doing now and how it might relate to, say, arts and the climate emergency?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'd love to. Yes, so I work at the McConnell Foundation. I've had the opportunity over the past 7 or so years to lead most of our city's work there, which has evolved from an experimental initiative called Cities for People, which has led to seeding and creating and spinning off a number of other initiatives, like Future Cities Canada, like something called Legitimate Cities, like Ville d'Avenir, which is here in Montreal and Quebec. And also Civic Indigenous, something we call Civic Indigenous 7.0 work. And one of the things that a lot of this has led to And when I say a lot of this, some of it's been informed by how the discourse and practice even of what is called smart cities, how that has evolved, as well as thinking about Indigenous reconciliation and what that can mean for how we reimagine cities, reimagine settler cities for the future. That's led to some ideas, which I'm now working on with many others, on what we're framing as sacred civics.
Okay.
And the notion of awakening 7th-generation cities. And it's a good place to be talking about it here, because I try to walk on the mountain every day, and one of the things that I often do is imagine a future where we are rebuilding cities in balance with nature. And what that actually means, not just in a technical way, because it does mean redefining and reimagining infrastructure and how we build it, as well as our city economies and so on. And it also requires spiritual and cultural transformation.
Law professor Shalanda Baker. Will we redesign systems to replicate the current structures of power and control? Or will we reimagine our systems to benefit those who are so often left out of discussions regarding systems design?
Just going to do a little acoustic moment here. There's that trickling stream there. That's quite sweet. And of course, we're in the heart of the city, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, this poor mountain's been, chopped at and parceled out a little bit. The streams, and there are still some natural spaces here, but I think what you're talking about is a type of renewal of our relationship in the dense human experience of cities with nature, and we haven't done a very good job at it, but we can.
Exactly. And this is actually one of my biggest passions in life. One of the things that drives me, that gets me up in the morning and that keeps me up at night, is that how we built cities, and especially how we built them the last 100 years, does not need to be how we continue to build them into the future. And part of that, in addition to what I mentioned, is something that has almost been sacrilege, if you will, to speak about in the profession of city planning, which is a profession I come from, but to talk about spirituality and the sacred in that context has not really been appropriate. That's not really been part of the discourse. And so now we're seeing increasingly there's an appetite. And we're excited about this book called Sacred Civics, which is in process right now, which was readily picked up by a mainstream publisher, Routledge, who will publish it next year. And in it we have 3 of us who are co-editors, and then we have about 20 chapter authors from various backgrounds in different parts of the world. We have a number of Indigenous, Black, and people of color, and others. From very different perspectives, including academia, practitioners. We have an Indigenous artist, and more. So that's an incredibly interesting and powerful journey that we're on. That we hope will open up more of this kind of integral thinking about the future of cities. And how, if we are to address ecocide and climate emergency, we cannot tinker at the margins. So very often things like climate action plans of cities, while they're very well intentioned, they might be primarily about building retrofits and converting mobility, meaning moving to electric vehicles. And very often it's believed that that's the answer, because obviously there are tons of buildings and there are lots of cars, but actually that I would argue is not actually going to change fundamentally how we build cities. We actually need to change our relationships with place, with land, with nature, with each other, and part of that starts in recognizing the sacred in one another and the sacred in nature and land.
Activist Sheila Watt Cloutier. It's important to recognize how closely linked environment, health, economics, culture, and rights are in our society. The earth is a living, breathing entity, just the same as our bodies are. Our survival utterly depends on living in nature, not apart from it.
Well, that word sacred sometimes is, people are, because of religion and because of certain cultural practices, but you can call it whatever you want, spiritual, sacred, personal belief. In Buddhism it's awareness.
Yes.
They're all similar. But I'm glad that we're opening up to these things because it's who we are, right? As people, we can't deny the fact that we have this innate sense of searching for, I guess you can use the word truth, but that's why I like art sometimes. You don't have to necessarily put a label on everything, You can just sort of experience a song or participate in a dance or listen to a story in a way that's open to, like we said earlier, different realities being informing who you are and what you think. So I think that book is going to be on my reading list because I'm not a cities expert. I lived in cities, of course, but so I'm curious, and I wish you well with that project.
Well, thank you. Cities are the largest. The largest production that we co-create as humans, and they are also surprisingly persistent. So organizations, businesses, other forms of organizing come and go. Even nation states change, but cities tend to persist. Interestingly, and I would say though that how they're persisting now and how they're the current model that is dominant of city building, which has been largely, exported from, imperial ways of places in the global north, has not been beneficial for humanity, for increasing equality, for improving ecological health, and so on. But it could be. It absolutely could be and needs to be.
Well, let's end with a topic that is also one we could go on for a long time, which is the idea of hope, or at least a sense of possibility. You expressed earlier that you felt that artists and creatives can propose a vision of the world. How do you feel about that notion of hope?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually struggle a little bit with the notion of hope.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, and I actually loved what you just said, sense of possibility, because that actually fully resonates, and maybe you can say that it's the same thing. But I guess hope. I think that maybe it's because hope has been appropriated in so many ways that has been unfair to people who are greatly suffering or oppressed, and called on to have hope and so on, and so maybe that's why I have kind of a visceral reaction or some baggage associated with it. But sense of possibility, that is really resonant for me, and I do think, not only about the role of artists and culture is fundamental and so necessary, and we need so much more of it, and not only on the side. The role of arts and culture in societal and civilizational change right now needs to be much more integral into yes artworks and imagine and helping us to culturally co-produce how we live and work together into the future, and that means works artworks, and it also means artist perspectives into much more mainstream institutions, ideas, thoughts about how change occurs. And one more thing I'll say about that, and it's something I was just thinking about this morning, is I think that how we organize ourselves for change is still, our development of that is still very nascent. You spoke about something in the podcast about organizing and massive social movements. And there are lots of social movements which are organizing. And then I think about all of the, incredible organizations and institutions that there are and that are so well-intentioned. A number of them, there are a number that we work with as an institution. We ourselves are a particular institution. And I also find that the way that organizations are structured, and very often institutions, is still perpetuating the dominant paradigm of competition, of rivalrous economics, and even if that's hello, and even if that's not the intention, that persists. And it's very so how do we get from where we are and so many great organizations and some social movements, but to actually organize in ways that are going to help us realize the kinds of futures that we've been talking about. And I think that the role of arts and culture also in that could be incredibly powerful and is probably needed.
And I know you're working on projects with Dark Matters Lab and others, and we'll talk about that at another time when they're more concrete. But I was just talking with Seth Klein yesterday in an episode, and he was talking about his climate emergency unit and his book A Good War. And so there are a number of initiatives like that are a fairly large scale, but that need to be amplified and become the new normal. His theory is that we need to essentially declare an emergency that puts us on a war footing to do what we need to do in terms of the climate emergency. But I think your thinking is also looking at systemic change, right? How do we change the systems, the institutions, the relationships that we have? And we don't always have to only look forward. We can look backwards at societies and cultures that have worked well.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. And, to that point, there's something that I only learned recently, and that is that democracies, when they were originally constructed, had the notion of responsibility to future generations at their heart.
Built in.
And that actually fell away a few hundred years ago, which, obviously to our great peril. But this... This question reminds me of something that actually Alex Ryan and Indy Johar and I wrote about. We just wrote an essay about it a few months ago, about how to build accountabilities into institutions so that they are future fit. And our argument was, if our organizations, institutions, governments don't bring a set of accountabilities into their very DNA, we don't really see how they can be future fit. And those accountabilities are accountability to future generations, to the health of the planet, to all people, so not just a subset of voting public, and not just a subset of people within a nation state, but actually to recognize the externalities that countries' practices have on peoples in other places. And then, of course, accountability for what we make for the designed world. So for plastics and for, construction materials and all kinds of other materials that we make. And so building, even if that was our starting point for how we built organizations and built rules and built metrics for progress, we think that would be transformational.
So let's do that.
All right, great. It's Saturday. Let's think a little bit more about it tomorrow and get started Monday.
Sure. Well, that's already begun. And the sun is just coming out here. Is there anything else, Jayne, that you wanted to add before we end here?
Maybe just a thank you. I really appreciate the perspective you bring, Claude, to this, and listening to your podcast, and as I said, like the sound, the pace, the different perspectives you bring, I find to be incredibly grounding and also stimulating. And so I really, really appreciate that and the contribution that you're making to this discourse and to change in that way.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. It's kind of coming naturally now. I was telling Seth yesterday when I retired, I knew that I had something to do. It wasn't quite clear what it was going to be. And this is the beginning of that. And I'm very privileged. I'm talking this afternoon with Jimmy Ung, who's written a lot about privilege, and I'm struggling with privilege because I am a privileged person. And then, sure, I'm aware, but what do you do about it? It's a whole other topic, but those kinds of things are the learnings that I'm going through without being so introspective that it gets all weird, Still, you have to look at yourself and who you are and what you're doing and look at it with a lens that is both generous and critical of what you can and cannot do. And this is one thing I can do, is talk to brilliant people like you and converse. And now we've just done a 33-minute sound walk, which is really fun, right? Because part of it is fun as well, as enjoying life. Yes, it's hard because the future does not look good, but I think our children are counting on us to do our part, and then at the right time in the right way to also get out of the way.
Yes, indeed.
It's a mix of leadership and modesty, right? Because there's some things you need to do, and there's some things you need to let others do.
Yes, and I'm glad you end on that too, because joy and laughter have to be part of it, because it's actually going to be much stronger. We have to have joy and laughter through this, because I can't imagine the alternative.
Well, it's pretty joyful. I mean, I'm a runner. I just love listening to people run to different paces. I also like biking.
Yes, well, and it's so nice too. I mean, for me, I am such a urban fanatic. I absolutely love cities, and when I step off the concrete and the asphalt onto the ground, I feel I breathe more deeply. I feel at home. I feel a connection to Mother Earth with every step. I feel energy that I draw on, and so yes, it's a wonderful place to be.